Welcome, everybody. Thank you for joining us for getting ready for Ultra HD on all devices. My name is Ben Schwartz. I'm with the Ultra HD Forum, where I run the communications working group with Sam, who's CTO here at NAB, and I hope will come soon. And I'm really proud to introduce this topic to you. Basically, the forum's been running for over 8 years, working steadfastly on professional Ultra HD production, distribution, and consumption. Well, obviously not the profession. The consumption isn't professional; it's more. But we kind of said, well, what's kind of new nowadays? And Yuri and Yasser, our new president, came up with this idea. Well, Ultra HD's kind of made it to the mainstream, but things have changed. Something's evolving, and we need to get ready for what's changed. What's changed is that now, if you actually take one of these devices out of your pocket, there's a very strong chance that it has many, if not all, Ultra HD technologies in some form. So how do we get ready for that? That's what this panel is about. And I'm happy to introduce Yuri Resnik, who's VP of Research at Bright Cove. He will be giving you a keynote before we kick into the panel session. And then we have Atak Biber, who is Director of Product Management at Qualcomm, and Felix Nemirovsky. Did I manage that? Felix, who is a Solutions Architect from Dolby, and finally Ian Nock, who runs interoperability within the Ultra HD Forum, and he's from Fairmile West. So without further ado, I'm going to change places with Yuri. And you've got a clicker there.
So let me start with checking how slides work here, and thank you very much for coming. And the topic is indeed exciting. If we think about what Ultra HD brings at the surface, it's a next level of experiences bringing us closer to reality. And if we look at visual features, what it means higher resolutions, higher dynamic range, higher bit depth, a broader gamut, and it all expands video features in domains that makes it closer to reality and makes us appreciate video more, and makes it more pleasurable experience. Similarly, if you look at audio, next generation audio brings a whole set of new enhancements, starting with object-based audio, where objects is unlike channels. Channels just produce mixture of different sources coming from left or right. In case of objects, we know exactly where sound is coming from. We know the location of the source in the sound scene. And this next generation audio, we're also talking about more immersive experience. Instead of 5.4, we're talking about 5.1.4, where 4 is the number of heights that are captured by the model. It also brings dialogue enhancements, multi-languages, and it also brings rich metadata, allowing rendering and description and rendering of audio in all sorts of reproduction settings with all different systems, sound bars, surround systems, headsets, and so on. But these are just content features. These are content features. To enable these types of features manifest themselves, they have to be support at device level, and they have to be support at file format level, they have to be support at codec level, and these are all a set of technologies that come next as we started working on Ultra HD. We standardized Ultra HD metadata, HDR metadata, for example. Next generation video codecs came about, next generation audio codecs, audio metadata were added a corresponding carriage mechanism and file formats and system-level delivery protocols such as HLS and Dash. But importantly, what also brings the next level of challenge to deployment is support from devices. Can hardware support it? Can operating system support it? Can applications and web browsers support rendering of these types of formats? And what we've seen in recent years is that support for all these functions has exploded from TV devices to mobiles to PCs. And to visualize it, I produced this slide where we put a timeline with points in time where all essential technologies have been introduced and where Ultra HD Forum came about around 2015 and produced 3 generations of guidelines educating industry on how to use all those specifications in a comprehensive manner. And what we've seen along this line is, of course, things like HEVC have been introduced since 2010, but fairly recently also have seen high-definition images introduced. For example, W3C added CICP to PNGs, and equally we've seen JPEGs with gain maps introduced by Adobe with Google Chrome support and by a few others. Of course, there are many other technologies that are capable of doing it, HEC and others. But what this timeline says that we've seen a lot of new standards added and a lot of new metadata standards added, and we've seen deployments of these technologies on PCs, on TVs, on mobiles, and on PCs. And if we look at this is a pictorial illustration of adoption cycle across TV devices, we see that the main adoption happened around 2017, 2019. This is where the fast slope of adoptions across Ultra TVs had happened. With mobiles, it was delayed. It was delayed till about 2018, where thankfully Apple came out with support for high efficiency AC and then HDR formats and Dolby Vision, Dolby Atmos on their devices. And we've seen, again, thanks to Qualcomm, we had Snapdragon supporting HEVC and other technologies. We've seen it propagating to all other sorts of mobiles and wearable devices. And last kind of domain in this evolution is adoption in PCs, in desktops and mobiles, and mobile laptops and laptop type of devices. What we've seen is that Apple, of course, introduced support to HEVC and HDR formats into MacBooks around 2018, but it was until very recently that Windows added support to HDR formats, and only last year they added support for HEVC by default with update of Windows 11. And importantly, the last kind of inflection point that I'm showing here is the event when Chrome browser and Chromium platform added support for HEVC. Because at this point, we know that majority of devices and majority of web browsers are capable of playing HEVC and Ultra HD content. And last but not least, of course, there are also now wearable devices, virtual reality devices, headsets that are also Ultra HD capable. So, and with all of this, as you see, with some delays and time shifts going from one category of devices to another, we are entering the world where pretty much all platforms out there are HDR capable. They're all coming with support, for, at least for essential codecs file formats. They have HDR capable displays. Many of them have speaker setups that are helpful, or at least they can connect a headset, which is a 3D audio headset. And with this, how do we make Ultra HD experience consistent and enjoyable across all this spectrum of devices. That's the main domain of our panel. And with this, let me bring the last slide and bring back Ben for the rest of the proceedings. Thank you.
Thank you. Amazing. Two things. You kept the time and you grew the audience by about 50% in your presentation. So that was an amazing achievement. One thing I wanted to say is, well, we're in a free market economy, and so all the different companies at NAB are going to be working on all of this. And what I'm going to be addressing in these questions is, where should we as an industry, embodied by the Ultra HD Forum, what are the problems? What should we be facing? What should be our priorities moving forward? After we spend all this time doing professional UHD, what are we going to do with this consumer and prosumer thing? So perhaps to kick off with my prestigious panel, start with the challenges question, perhaps for ATAC, because where you see us moving in this UHD everywhere world, what do you see as the key challenges?
Maybe I can say a couple things looking at it from a device perspective. As a Qualcomm is the silicon provider for most smartphones, headset devices, and so on. I kind of see the main challenge being the fragmentation as we see it. And there are two layers of fragmentation. First one is imagine smartphones. There is a premium tier devices, the top-end smartphones that supports multiple flavors of HDR. It has the right display, right camera, and so on. And if you look at lower tier devices that goes to emerging markets, things that you can buy for like $200, even though what Qualcomm provides the silicon, all the HDR processing capabilities could be there. There are other components that add to the HDR experience, which is again display, camera, and they are not present in those devices. So this price level, let's say differentiation or tiering, is one level that we are seeing as a fragmentation, but this has more to do with the economics. The other thing we are observing is, even if two OEMs uses the same solution from Snapdragon, and they may be using even the same display, due to different color processing pipelines or the way they like see the colors, what they achieve on their devices with this HDR10 or 10 plus would be slightly different. So the overall user experience that you are experiencing on different devices for the same HDR technology seems to be variant. And there are things that we are doing together with platform partners like Google to unify that experience to the extent we could. So I see this segmentation as one challenge. Again, one has to do more with the economics. There is not much we can do about it. But the other part, unification of the HDR experience, is something that we are working on with partners.
Thank you. So you addressed the sort of fragmentation side in the slides. And by the way, this is first for me, where you have the panel questions in front of you so you can think of them. So if it brings any further questions to you, please raise your hand. This is an interactive part of the session, so don't hesitate to jump in. But ATAC, you talked about the fragmentation. One way could we address, so open question, any panel member, please, could we address it with better ways, different ways of preparing the content so that we'd say, well, okay, that fragmentation is a fact of life and we have to deal with it with new kinds of content preparation? Can someone take that question?
I'll take that question. So I'm with Dolby, and Dolby is more of an ecosystem company as opposed to one component. This is one of the reasons that Apple decided to do a lot of Dolby Vision and Atmos stuff. But the key point is that we participate in content creation. We also participate in the silicon that goes into devices. And so, for example, when you have multi-tier TVs, I'm going to use TVs as an example. When you have multi-tier TVs, they have different capabilities, but it is through the functionality of metadata that all of these TVs can receive both immersive audio and high dynamic range experience that utilizes just the capabilities of those TVs. So in other words, they don't all decide on their own how the video should look. There is information that comes with Dolby Video that tells it, if you're a 300 nit TV, this is what you should do. If you're a 500 nit TV, this is what you should do. So essentially, the content creators feel that through Dolby Vision, they can have a consistent experience, whether it's a $5,000 TV or a $300 TV.
Okay, that's still part from the professional production side, but perhaps Ian, you want to take over and see how does that apply to content, user-generated content on mobile phones, for example?
Yeah, I think ATAC actually put his finger on it in the fact that there's a lot of different scale of devices there, from the low end to high end. They all have different capabilities. The mid to high end are the ones that are having the capabilities to display HDR imagery, to have spatial sound of various different forms. But the lower end, of course, will have lower quality screens, may not have the processing capability to display HDR content, even in an SDR converted state. And that's actually this sort of problem for prosumers and the content creators out there who are not in the production company side of things. They're in the single person Twitch streamer level type person or a YouTuber. And for them, they've got to they're coming across this thought as they move from a H.264 world to a HDR world, that they've got to figure out how those viewers can actually see high quality video content. And that's where Dolby there, of course, mentioned about dynamic metadata solutions to be able to have SDR and HDR display of the same content. And I think a lot of work has to be done on those content formats to make them easier to use, because it shouldn't be a science experiment for a lot of these people. A lot of the content providers are expert artists, but not engineers.
So we have a question in the audience. So can someone give him a mic?
Hi, my name's Alex Granica. I'm an image scientist, and this conversation is interesting. It spurred a question in my mind because being that I'm in the field of image science, I'm not to a lay person, but can you speak to, so from a consumer level, right? So if I've got, you mentioned television at home, I know at times my own experience is that the HDR content that I'm getting will perform differently depending on the hardware box, whether it's, let's say, a Roku, Xbox, PlayStation, and then the app. So I might not even get the same experience with, let's say, the Netflix app or the Disney app. Can you speak to maybe where some of the breakdown or challenges is to getting a more uniform experience out of your HDR screen with the devices that are getting plugged into it or that you're leveraging?
That's a very precise question. Right. So, Felix first?
No,
go ahead.
I would say there are many layers and we need to get through them. But it is hardware support. It is what is the physical capabilities of your device display, right? Second is how these capabilities of this display are exposed to operating system, whether the operating system treats it right, whether there is a graphics processor that is connected in a proper way to it, and the characteristics of this graphics processor, how it implements color mapping and all color science functions. And then it goes to the app layer and codec layer and how we encode and transmit it. So to some extent, we really depend on how hardware vendors are implementing some components.
Could we ask the question, though, to ATAC, when you have a Qualcomm, when you're providing the same chipset in completely different environments and the result is different, do people come back to you, and do you try and have to fix this problem, or is that not your problem because it's an identical chipset just doing different things?
No, it's an observation. I don't know if it is a problem that kind of holds them back from putting devices to market. But as I was saying, if let's say it's a capture or display, we provide all the tools, all the libraries available to us, and tuning tools. But at that point, it is what I'm observing is how, let's say, a company like Samsung or Xiaomi does color processing. It will be slightly different. So we can, give guidance, but at the end, it is at their freedom to define, what is the overall rendering experience. So my understanding is the color processing itself, seems to deviate from vendor to vendor. And I'm not I have my colleagues here more expert on this, and I would imagine things are also similar in the TV world, right? The way red presents itself on a Samsung TV versus Hisense, I think it is a little bit different.
If I can talk to that a little bit. So the interesting thing about devices, they make use of lots and lots of standards for delivering the content, formatting the content, informing on what you do with the content. But the most interesting thing, when it comes to the display and rendering, that's not standardized. That's actually the competitive area for every display manufacturer, for every device manufacturer, about how to produce something that's better in their eyes, in the consumer's eyes. And that's actually where you get the variation, because there's a level of competition taking place there that is to do something extra special and better for the consumer. And whether that really is extra special and good for the consumer, that's open to question, because all we see, of course, and the consumer sees is variable rendering, basically. Yeah. And I suppose the key question there is why is it variable? And a lot of it does come down to you get what you pay for, pretty much.
All right, I'll take a stab at this now. So when you buy a TV, most people that bought a TV and installed it, you notice there's like the in-store mode, right? And guess what? That in-store mode is going to crank up the brightness and saturate the colors. So what I'm saying is all of these TVs have chips with various capabilities, but how they behave depends on how they were designed to implement specific content, right? So if they're playing SDR content, not high dynamic range, they're not going to just play it the way it was intended. They're going to boost it up, right? And so what you're going to get is something with, let's say, super bright yellow where you don't see any details. That would be not good behavior. But consumers, as long as it looks bright, like it. So the problem really is that the TV manufacturers want to sell a TV. The content creators want the content to look correct. And so essentially standards are there. So to answer your question, if it's HDR content, there's a standard that says you will display this the following way. But depending on which mode the consumer pressed the TV into, the sports mode, the theater mode, the TV will just decide what to do with it. So again, this may sound like a shameless plug, but this is why Dolby actually produces a way to control this functionality. So therefore, when the TV gets this content and it has Dolby Vision metadata, it actually is under control of that metadata. The TV doesn't decide how to display that content. Now, to your question of Roku versus this versus that, unfortunately, as they pointed out, there are many layers. So what that means is, especially for live content, the content goes through a variety of stages where, let's say, it started out as SDR, and somebody decided that we want to distribute it as Dolby Vision, so they would convert it to HDR, and that process could go awry. Same with standard way of displaying, let's say HLG or PQ or HDR10. Those are standard-based HDR formats. If the upstream conversion was done in some inappropriate way, what you're going to see is the TV doing what it's supposed to do. It's displaying HLG, it's displaying HDR10, but it's going to look wrong because it was converted somewhere upstream incorrectly. So essentially, it is a Wild West, like they've pointed out, and there are multiple places where things can break down.
Thanks. That was a shameless plug, but it was a nice one. We have time for just one last question with our last 5 minutes, so I'd just like to take a second to frame it. Again, we're at NAB. We represent the industry, so the last question on this slide is what's missing in terms of standards? What should we focus on to address these problems? Again, as we said in the beginning through Yuri's presentation, we're in a new world of UHD, Ultra HD technologies becoming pervasive on all devices. So in this new world, starting from 2024 forward, what's missing? If everybody could take a stab at that at about a minute each, and I'll cut you off if you're much longer. You want to start, Yuri?
So first, I think from the point of view of media delivery system, what should be understood is that some devices still will not have HDR capability and Ultra HD capability. So there should be graceful, compatible mode, SDR mode, always provisioned, and it's a function of a delivery platform to
You're
provide
saying like graceful failure or whatever.
graceful failure to provide the graceful conversion down to SDR and deliver to those devices which are not SDR capable the experience that they can still deliver given these capabilities. And second, with fragmented devices, probably we will need to have support for several different formats, and understand that some devices will have just this codec versus that codec supported, or these types of metadata versus the other, and have not simulcast but switchable
So
behavior.
graceful delivery and better support for multi-format. ATAC, do you want to take a stab at what we're missing?
Maybe an extension of ongoing studies could be, Yuri mentioned HDR imaging, for example, is out there. I think it is becoming more and more mainstream. And I think that's an area that can be explored, especially when you combine it with some of the advanced use cases, like how you would, for example, take an HDR image and send it to an SDR display over like Miracast, or vice versa. If it is a HDR image, sent to an HDR display, like is it rendered properly? So I think there are new components coming to this HDR landscape, particularly like imaging, web itself, and the use cases. I think we need to take a pragmatic look at how these use cases are evolving, and what what kind of fences we need to put around to guide the user experience.
Okay, so I'll take away from that use cases, preparing for more use cases, and being explicit about them.
That will be my take. Yeah.
Thanks.
Okay.
Felix.
Yeah, so I'm going to plug UHD Forum. So guidelines are a very important aspect of getting this done. Essentially, you can imagine that studios and individuals, prosumers who are creating content are always going to try to do their best to create the best looking content, but they're not in control of, once that content leaves their hands, how it gets to the TVs. So the benefit of these guidelines and just the general idea of certification and testing is to provide a way that content doesn't get messed up. It's the most non-technical term, on the way to the TV, to the phone. So essentially, this is knowledge that has been developed by professionals that just needs to be distributed to as many folks as possible.
I like that. So basically more of what we've done, but democratizing it, like evangelization. I can't, the words are at the tip of my tongue, making it so that lay people can understand this obtuse technical stuff.
Yeah, you don't need to get into the bits and bytes to understand that what you're looking at now looks different on the TV, so therefore you need to do something different.
Thanks. And the last
contribution, Ian? It's about simplicity for the consumption. It needs to be simple when it's consumed, and for that, I think effort needs to be expended on the formats and the delivery processes and the delivery chains all the way to the display. No matter what device, it needs to be resilient, and we need to protect consumers from fragile formats that break when they are displayed on displays that aren't quite necessarily right for what the content was originally targeted at. It has to be the case that because of the devices are continually going to be not only just SDR or HDR, but actually various grades of SDR and various grades of HDR, and that's why I focus on we need to have less fragility in the delivery process to the display.
Okay, but that sounds like a high-level objective. In the nitty-gritty, what you on the Interop say, and the next 12 months, what are you going to be testing? What should the guidelines be writing? Something concrete that we should actually be putting out.
Formats that support displaying SDR and HDR without any consumer involvement.
That's a nice way of putting it. Okay, well, I think we've got to the end of our time. Let me check. We're 1 minute past the time, so I'm getting an approval from the organizers. So I'd like to thank you very much, and we're really proud as the audience have stayed right to the end. They've even slightly grown, so this has been a lot of pleasure for me to moderate, and I'd like to thank my panel and thank the audience.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.